Lecture 10b, second part of the lecture on birds and flowers, is about the bird and flower painting of the time of Emperor Huizong and afterwards, with a brief look at a slightly earlier artist. As in the lecture that preceded this one, my approach will be mainly visual, how bird and flower painting changes stylistically from one period to another and one artist to another, what each artist contributed. I'll deal with the paintings ascribed to the Emperor Huizong himself, only with regard to style and authenticity, what characterizes the paintings that I take to be perhaps quite likely genuine works from his hand. And that account will differ strongly from what you would find if you read about Huizong in, for instance, the very fine writings of Patricia Ebery and Maggie Bickford, which I have on my stud handouts and which I strongly recommend that you read. Also, Elfriede Merck, very fine scholar, has an article coming out in which she attempts to relate one of the paintings we'll see at the beginning, that is Cui Bo's painting of Hare and Magpies, dated 1061, to relate this to a situation or an event of the time. Well, she gave this in a session dedicated to Ellen Lang, whom I mentioned in this lecture. At any rate, I've read it. I think it's fine. I'm not going to try to comment on it. As I say, it's not the kind of approach I'm taking, but I recommend that you read it when it appears. Bird and flower painting is a designation that includes also animals and insects, as we saw on the previous part. Bird and flower painting is treated as one of the major subject categories in the Emperor Huizong's catalog, Shrenhe Huapu, along with the other major categories, landscape, of course, figure painting, which is now less prominent than it had been back in the Tang Dynasty, but doesn't occupy major artists so much, and religious painting, Taoist and Buddhist, which I'm not covering. There's a new extra category added now for subjects that are practiced by the amateurs. Ink bamboo is treated. In practice, this includes also plum blossoms painted in ink and later ink orchids and all of that. Those are the major categories of Chinese painting as seen and categorized by the Chinese catalogers themselves. Okay, I begin this section with one major painting of birds and animals in a landscape setting from the Northern Song period, another work by a known artist, and another one that's actually signed and dated, so that it makes up another of our firm monuments. This is a work by the painter Cui Bo. Okay, here it is now on the screen. Cui Bo was a major master in the Imperial Academy, active in the mid to later 11th century. He's said to have been a brilliant painter. He worked without preliminary sketches, accomplishing large, detailed, complicated compositions out of his head, so to speak, as people watch. In the previous section, we saw a handscroll with sparrows and tree branches with his name written on it, a would-be signature, but that's not reliable. Whereas this is a reliable and famous work of his, the one reliable work that survives. This is the painting of Hare and Magpies, signed and dated 1061 in the National Palace Museum. This can be seen, I think, as the closest bird and flower equivalent for the great Northern Song landscape paintings that we saw in a previous lecture. That is, it embodies a deep understanding of nature, great observation, seasonal indications, movement and life and atmosphere, and so on. These are, well, some in their way new for this period. Now, I put beside it a painting that we saw in a previous lecture, about a century earlier, probably. This is the painting probably by Huang Zhucai. You remember that, I discussed it then. Well, the Cui Bo painting is obviously much more spacious. It has a real interaction between the birds in the middle ground bushes and the foreground object, which in this case is a rabbit, a pheasant, and the other one. I mean, it's basically, he continues the same kind of composition, but does something radically new with it. and, as I say, produces an effect of as though we're really there, effect of as though we're really observing this. Okay, now then, we'll look at this Cui Bo painting part by part. Here's the upper part of it. What it represents is two birds, jays, one of them in flight, wings spread. We've seen that in old paintings from way back to the Tang Dynasty. The other one perched on the branch and chattering, one wings out, chattering down at a poor rabbit who has ventured too close to their nest, presumably. Their nest isn't actually shown, and they're trying to drive it away. As I say, there are seasonal indications. The sky is darkened, wind is blowing, it's winter, the leaves are turned brown and tattered. Bamboo survives. Well, here's a detail of the bamboo. Bamboo is famous in China, or sort of represents the nobleman who doesn't change his principles under hard conditions, and is often represented with that symbolic value to present to people. Okay, here it's seen not as a symbol, but as an actual plant growing in nature, blown by the wind and all the rest of it. Quite fine. Then here is the base of the trunk of the tree with the some of the bamboo growing and reeds blown by the wind again. Very definitely a sense of the vicissitudes of living things in harsh conditions. Again, going up above, here is the bird perched on the branch, chattering down, its beak opened, and really quite convincing. A lot of action in this picture, and a lot of, as I say, interaction between the things in it. Well, it's done as though, as I say, we were actual observers, somehow able to be in the scene and watching the creatures without their being aware of it. And that is, in that sense, it's like the great paintings of the deer in the autumn forest that we saw earlier, as though we are sort of unseen observers watching them respond to some kind of stimulus, whatever. Okay, and here, now let's see, onward. There's a wonderful close-up of the one of the tattered leaves. Well, the artist obviously observes all this, paints it accurately with great sensitivity, great sheer technical skill. There's hardly a painting one can point to that has the same kind of sort of understanding of natural phenomena as this one. Here's the bird in flight. And again, I'm not going to try to say whether this actually represents a bird in flight as it might be caught today by a fast motion camera. But at any rate, it's certainly convincing as that. And again, the bird has its beak open, and the two jays are chattering down at this poor rabbit, who down there, here's a rabbit down below, looking up at them. One paw raised, about to take off, but sort of pausing to sort of take in what's happening before he runs off. Anyway, a little dramatic scene, quite wonderfully caught. And notice here, by the way, the drawing of the reeds. Another kind of artist would sort of repeat something like this. This artist, this great artist, Cui Bo, manages to represent a bunch of reeds with some of them bent and broken, some of them pushed down by the wind, making it an interesting little detail in itself. Everything in the picture is that way. I think I put this rabbit on beside the ones that are in the Liao painting that we saw earlier. Much more naturalistic, much more full-bodied, not outlined, but with the fur drawn. Well, I won't do all that again. I think I showed this before. Okay, a wonderful painting. Now then, we go on to talk about the Emperor Huizong. 1082 to 1135 are his dates. This is the painting that we're going to look at and put beside it the calligraphy, which is his inscription on the painting. Now, we've already seen Huizong calligraphy. There was a piece of it, for instance, attached to the scroll attributed to Gu Kaizhi, the admonitions of the court ladies. So we're a little familiar with that. Now, before I go on to talk about it, I want to speak of the two major books that have appeared recently about Huizong and his court painters and so on. One of them edited by Professor Patricia Buckley Ebrey, University of Washington, Seattle, and Maggie Bickford, one of the major Chinese painting specialists. And they edited a book titled Emperor Huizong and Late Northern Song China, The Politics of Culture and the Culture of Politics, 2006, several years ago. And in that is Maggie Bickford's article titled Huizong's Paintings, Art and the Art of Emperorship. And then there's another more recent book by Patricia Ebrey herself, Accumulating Culture, the Collections of Emperor Huizong, about Huizong as a collector. Very important book, and I recommend it highly. In fact, what I will be saying about Huizong here and elsewhere is very much based on, well, old readings, old notes, and so on. I'm not really up to date on any of these historical matters. So, well, I used to say when I gave my early Chinese painting course, I would say to the students, if I say one thing and Professor Keatley of the history department says another thing, he's right. And now I would say the same thing about Patricia Ebrey. If she says one thing and I say another, she's right. So anyway, she's a major historian, and I certainly am not. Anyway, major books, they don't take the same attitudes, approaches toward Huizong's paintings that I do, but all right, why should they? Anyway, I'll talk about that as we go on. Now, here we are then with a painting attributed to Huizong and an example of his calligraphy in the so-called slender gold manner, as it's called. Very elegant, very formal, as befits an emperor. Reedy, attenuated brushstrokes with carefully controlled beginnings and endings. Nothing spontaneous in this kind of calligraphy. Very different in that way from the kind of calligraphy done by Su Dongpo and Mi Fu and the others we saw in a previous lecture, the literati, outside the court. Well, I mean, they were in and out. They could be high ministers in the court, but they were not part of the hereditary whatever that the emperors were. The forms of this calligraphy are set. There's nothing left to momentary decisions or, as I say, spontaneity. And this will be true to some extent of the paintings attributed to Huizong, but also academy painting of the kind that he instituted and encouraged, and continues to a greater or lesser extent throughout southern Song. Huizong ruled from 1101 to 1125. He imposed his taste very heavily on his painters. He gave them texts to illustrate. He criticized their work. He demanded accuracy, realism of a special kind. The paintings had to have some subtle content, poetic content, some subtle conception. But within that, they had to be true to nature. And painters who worked in what he called careless or independent manners were dismissed. I will later quote from a translation of his edict about how painters should work, about how you grade painters. He promulgated an edict that painters, quote, should represent things as they really are, end quote. And he established criteria of excellence within his academy, which I say I'll read in a little bit. But, okay, the pinnacle of realism, you might say, had been reached already in the painting of the 10th, 11th centuries that we've seen, like the great Cui Bo. Or so we would assume from extant work. So what is this new kind of insistence on truth to nature going to be then? Well, we'll see that, and I'll talk about it as we look at the paintings attributed to Huizong. Okay, here is one painting attributed to him, now on the screen, titled Birds in a Wax Bush, published in Suran and various other places. So the subject is a kind of lily down below, a flowering branch on which two birds are perched. Two bees, you can't see them. I don't think I have them in my details, but I'm pretty sure there are two bees there. Okay, let's go on. Next, the next slide, the next image. The two birds perched on the branch, both looking out of the picture, so to speak, but no real sense of anything outside the picture. They are drawn quite flat, they are not as full-bodied, not with a sense of round, feathered form as we've seen in some other things. Okay, maybe we can understand this as they're having been really done by the emperor. The emperor was the kind of person who, as I say, insisted on getting everything right. He knew all the different kinds of birds, and he knew what their plumage was like, and their markings, and their shapes, and all the rest. And so these are ornithologically accurate bird watchers' images, so to speak. Okay. Even if you see the painting of the wing of the nearer bird, it's done with very neat brushstrokes of a kind that a good amateur might have done. Now, on the other hand, let's see the rest of it. Here is the flower. Here is the flowering plant and a bit of the branch. The rest of the painting, on the other hand, seems rather clearly to have been done by a really highly skilled academy master. The branch, for instance, and the way the contours of the branch are done to bring out the roughness and to show something of the roundness of it at the same time. This is not something that your amateur is going to do. So I would make a guess that Huizong may have painted the birds in, or had somebody outline them for them, and then painted them in stroke by stroke, and then had his academy master do the rest of the picture. Okay, let's take that as a hypothesis and see how it would work with the others. Now, okay, here's the next picture, which is the Hibiscus and golden pheasant. This is the hanging scroll in the Palace Museum in Beijing. I don't have very good slides of it. I got this plus one detail. Here, put that on also, please, next to it. A close-up of the bird. That is an actual slide. The other is made for reproduction. The bird is perched on the branch of a flowering bush, as you see, and it looks up at two butterflies that are flying in the upper right part of the picture. Well, it's an artificial sense of seeing. Huizong, well, he made his artists get it right. There's a story about how a bird climbing up onto a trellis, and the painter shows it with its right foot raised, and Huizong makes a fuss about it and says it was birds climbing up on this kind of bird climbing up on the trellis raised its left foot. Okay, that kind of accuracy. Now, when we look at the bird, we see something like what we saw with the birds in the other picture. That is, it's as though someone had sort of outlined it neatly for the emperor, or perhaps he did that himself to get the space right, and then he had drawn in neatly the markings on the bird and the colors and got all that right, and maybe all the little circles down on the tail. Then, so he presents it as a painting by himself. These paintings were done for gift, mostly. And he spent a lot of his time painting, apparently. I didn't mention in the previous one, the birds in a wax bush, that the inscription on it, according to one study which I remember reading, is actually a love poem. And the writer of that study, published years ago, suggested that it was addressed to a woman with whom the emperor was infatuated in his later years. Well, maybe so. When paintings of this kind, academy paintings and paintings by emperors and so on, are somehow associated with the personal life of the painter, then one is suspicious. At least I am. I don't think they were done that way, but okay. Anyway, getting back to this, the hibiscus and golden pheasant. So here we are anyway with a painting which, let's maybe take the hypothesis that the painting of the bird, or the filling in of the colors and the markings and all that, was done by the emperor himself. You can see how the markings on the upper part of the bird don't really suggest going around the bird in the way they would if a really high-level academy artist were to do it. Okay, now we go on to one more, a very famous and quite fine painting of the ascribed to the Emperor Huizong. This one in the Boston Museum. And looking at the inscription first, which is what you come to when you roll such a scroll, this is one titled and representing the five-colored parakeet. Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And here is his inscription. He writes about the five-colored parakeet, and then he says, now I'm going to compose a poem, and then he does compose a poem. And then he signs it with his imperial cipher and says, made by me, Mike OK. A fine example, again, of the writing of Huizong, and those who deal with calligraphy seem to believe it's genuine. So this is a really good candidate for a genuine work by Huizong. Okay, and then next, please. Here's the main part of the painting. The bird perched rather stiffly on the branch in pure profile, the most revealing pose for a bird. And again, the bird looking rather flat. I'll have a detail in a minute. And the branch probably done by some very good academy artist. Okay. The Huizong, by the way, sometimes put dots of lacquer in the eyes of his birds to give them a more lifelike quality. Well, an artist who imparts life to his subjects in the old sense, an artist like Cui Bo, doesn't have any need for a device like that. Anyway, here the branch is spread out like a fan, and the bird, the blossoms all very carefully placed, all against an abstract ground. The bird and the branch, that is, exist in some timeless, airless world. No sense of real presence, as in the Cui Bo picture and so on. And here we go. Here's the bird up somewhat closer. And then I have a still closer detail. Here, put that over on the right. Good. Now, here we see very much the same thing as we saw in the painting in Beijing of the hibiscus and golden pheasant. That is to say, as though our imperial amateur had filled in neatly with his brush and his paints, with some help from the academy artist or advice from them, all the markings of the bird. He gets it ornithologically right. He passes the whole thing off as his painting, which in a sense, from his imperial point of view, it is. Maybe academy painters did things like painting the beak and so on. I don't know, hard to say. But at any rate, this is I think, a plausible hypothesis of how we can understand the paintings ascribed to Huizong. I would take these three as very good candidates and understand them in this way. That is, as combinations of the emperor's hand and academy artists doing much of the rest, doing all the rest. Okay, here's another picture. This is the painting called Finches and Bamboo, a short hand scroll, formerly in the Crawford collection, now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is a painting I used to represent Huizong in my scarab book. Well, at that time, some new things were appearing. The Crawford collection, I was involved with others in cataloging it. And this was exciting to have a new Huizong, to have a new something. And I put several paintings in the scarab book that maybe I shouldn't have, or wouldn't now. I would go back to the more old-fashioned, well-known examples. This is maybe okay. I haven't seen it carefully for a long time. Very impressive bunch of seals. It was owned by Zhang Da-chen and sold by him to Crawford, and that always raises a question. I mean, anything Zhang Da-chen owned is questionable, because always the possibility that he did it or had it done or whatever. Okay, the number of imperial seals is a little almost over-impressive, and something about the painting of the earth bank overhanging here, and all these little lumpy rocks down toward the bottom. And the two birds are quite fine. They are seen in a combination, in an arrangement that is is quite commonly seen in paintings associated with Huizong. One of the birds in the upper left, seen as if full-faced but with the head turned, looking back toward the other one, and the other bird seen below in profile, on different levels, that is, perched. Okay, this is a very formal arrangement, and anyway, it's a painting that doesn't show any great power of organizing forms, so it could be some part. Well, as I say, I don't really know. just how to assess this painting at this time. It's a fine painting in any case. Okay, there are a number of paintings I should mention here attributed to him, done in ink monochrome on paper, which are, well, old and important, I guess, but I'm not really treating them. They're taken very seriously by some scholars, including mainly Chinese scholars, who have, and one of them went for a huge price recently in at an auction. But I'm not really treating these. They're a separate question. Okay, now let's go on to a few others. Here's a painting of a dove, next please, on a peach branch, dated 1107. What's supposed to be Huizong's inscription and signature, or his imperial cipher, let's say, thing at the bottom, which is supposed to be a kind of very simplified form of the characters Chen Xia Yi Ran, the only person under heaven. Well, I don't know about that. Maybe that's for other people to judge. This is a fine painting. It's not by Huizong. I think it may be a copy after, maybe an early Academy work, whatever. It's in the collection, in the Setsu collection in Tokyo. Setsu is a dealer, very fine dealer, located near Nihonbashi. Used to be, I hope it still is. I visited them many times. I knew the old Setsu and the young Iwao Setsu. And I wandered in there by sheer chance once, and I went in because there was a beautiful Ninsei pot in the window, and I went in to see that, and then I asked casually, do you have any paintings, Chinese paintings? And, oh yeah, what do you want to see? And I say, oh, Ming Cheng painting. And then they said, no, we have only Song Yuan paintings. So I came back the next day and we're shown a dazzling series of important paintings. Okay, this is Setsu collection. This is an early copy, or maybe imitation, as I say. Huizong produced such paintings in considerable numbers, and they were copied, and they were presented to people. So they survive in all kinds of different forms. Here is another painting in Japan, a horizontal picture representing quail and narcissus. This is in the Asano collection, one of the great family collections of Japan. A fine early painting, probably not by Huizong. I think almost certainly not by Huizong. A big imperial seal at the left and a smaller one over at the far right middle. But these are added maybe in Japan. His name is attached to lots of fine old paintings in Japan. Could be by an academy master working under him, a painter named Lian Zhong, who specialized in quail, conceivably his. Anyway, a fine old painting worth attention. Now, next, please. Now, here's a very important painting for our study of Huizong. This is the picture representing auspicious cranes over the palace. This is in the Liaoning Museum, and it represents an event, a very auspicious event, when a group of cranes appeared in the sky over the palace and proceeded to dance, wheel in the air, highly auspicious. And this was depicted as by some academy master working under Huizong. It has a piece of calligraphy attached to it by Huizong, which seems to be the real thing. There's a very good article about this by Peter Sturman in Ars Orientalis number 20 in 1990. Also, Maggie Bickford writes about it in her study which I mentioned. Maggie Bickford argues that all the paintings attributed to Huizong should be seen as auspicious omens rather than as works of art, and that seeing them that way will change our ideas about their true nature. Now, I'm not going to try to make that argument or evaluate it. Yes, there's something to be said for that. It's not the approach I myself am taking. When Pat Ebrey and Maggie Bickford were beginning their project at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton in 1998-99, I was there with them by good chance, and I presented my ideas on Huizong with slides. Well, they went in a different direction, which is exactly what they should have done. Scholarly disagreement is healthy. We need to work independently and introduce new ideas and approaches. You read different authors, you make your own decisions about who is most convincing. And as I say, I recommend highly that you read what Maggie Bickford has to say about Huizong, as well as what Pat Ebrey does as an historian. Pat Avery has also written a very good book on Song Dynasty marriage. She is specialized in that kind of topic and is one of the top Chinese historians in this country or anywhere. Okay, now then, the next one. Now here, by contrast, is a painting which I think is, absolutely modern. This is one, the Auspicious Dragon Rock, a hand scroll now in the Palace Museum in Beijing, but originally, formerly I say originally by intent, in the hands of Zhang Daqian. And I think it's a forgery by him, quite frankly. It probably matches some old record of a known painting. Here, we'll now see the detail. He's a little too clever for his own good. Here in the upper part, water has collected in the hollow of the rock and a overhanging flowering bush. You see part of the bush, the flowers reflected in the water. That's a bit too much for this period, I think. And the painting of the interior of the rock, the way you see different levels of going back through the rock, all of that is, almost photographic, or more than photographic. Well, anyway, it's too much for the period of Huizong, I think, by far. And I think it's a forgery done by Zhang Daqian. Here, by the way, is a picture of an actual rock, quite large. You can see people down at the bottom, so you see the size of it. And this could be the very rock that Zhang Daqian represented. This is actually now located at the entrance of the Summer Palace, as I remember. Okay, and it's at least the kind of rock, if not the very rock, that Zhang Daqian copied or reproduced, whatever, to make this forgery, what I believe to be a forgery. This is not obviously an opinion shared by everybody. Okay. Before I leave Huizong, I want to speak briefly about another group of paintings ascribed to him. These are handscrolls done in ink, sometimes with light color, in broader brushwork on paper. And these are in Chinese collections and taken more seriously by Chinese connoisseurs, who argue that they look more like the kind of painting that an amateur would do, and so they are more likely to be genuinely from Huizong's hand. This one is in the Shanghai Museum, and it represents here 4 magpies in a bare willow, seen here, and in the following images, 4 ducks on the shore. It's outfitted with impressive seals and inscriptions, and it does indeed look like the work of an unskilled artist. The next, please. Here are the ducks. As for my own opinion, I can only say that I've never really had an opinion. I've avoided these paintings, not really wanting to tackle the problem of their authenticity. So I simply present them as a problem, with the commentary, no opinion. Now I'm going to talk about Academy bird and flower painting more generally, from the time of Huizong through the Southern Song. And I'm beginning with a great painting, anonymous 12th century painting, time of Huizong, titled Birds in a Thicket of Flowering Plum and Bamboo. I had a detail of this, a large detail, in the Skira book, discussed it at some length, putting it in contrast to the Cui Bo painting. It's in the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition, and so on. Now, and I'll bring back and put beside it the painting by Cui Bo, just to make the comparison as I talk. Well, this is another of the major surviving hanging scrolls from the Song period. It doesn't have any signature or identifying seals. I have a theory about who the artist might have been, and I'll speak about that in a minute. At any rate, it's a painting in which everything is carefully arranged. The birds and the plants are depicted with as much accuracy individually, as much truth to nature as the painters could muster. And yet the whole thing is less convincing as a depiction of a real scene than the Cui Bo picture. So what is it about it? There's a certain sharpness, clarity of presentation. Everything in it is distinct. But in the end, it's not realism at all, but a kind of super realism. The eye doesn't really see this way. This kind of picture is like the combined product of many separate visual experiences. That is, the artist looks long and hard at one thing and then at another and so on, kind of analytical approach, and then presents it all, putting it all together with a kind of unnatural clarity. A painting that implies prolonged concentration. You can't just glance at such a painting. You have to reverse the process of creation. You have to receive the effect of concentrating your vision and your attention on one thing after another. Okay, anyway, here's this quite fine painting, which, and as I say, I will reproduce part of it in my scrapbook. Now let's go on and see the details. Now here, the main section of it. It's titled, as I say, Birds in a Thicket of Blossoming Plum and Bamboo. And the birds are arranged in pairs, 3 pairs of birds, plus one additional bird down at the bottom, I'll show in a bit. And the pairs are done in just the kind of paired arrangement, very set, as though they were posing for their pictures, that Huizong was imposed on his academy, and his academy artists did. The next, please. Here, the upper part, at the top, here's a pair of birds. I'm not going to tell what they are. They look kind of parakeet-like. Anyway, I'm not a bird watcher. I was always criticized for this by my great teacher, Ed Schaefer, who was. Okay. Anyway, one of them seen in strict profile, as you see, higher, looking back. The other one over on the side, facing toward us, and then with a head turned. The same kind of pairing we saw in the former Crawford handscroll. Okay, then here's a detail just of the bamboo, the blossoming plum, and so on. It is, as I say, a thicket, and at the same time, it's not a kind of confusion as in some other paintings. It's all rather neat, really, and clear, and you can make out the bamboo, the blossoming plum. Well, you have to imagine the artist. How would you do this? You would paint the nearest things first, and then other things behind it, going back and back and back through through depth. Although the painting doesn't have much of real depth, it's as if everything is pressed into a single plane, including the birds. And here's a pair of birds, shrikes maybe, seen in the sort of middle left, in exactly the same poses, except that one of the one on the left is sleeping, eyes showing sleep, and perched on this unnatural screen, as it acts, of bamboo and blossoming plum. Okay, so we have 3 pairs of birds, and here's a close-up of the shrike. It's drawn in that manner we've seen in the previous lecture, by which it's not outlined, but the fine strokes that render the plumage, give it body, and give it roundness, and in a kind of near miraculous way, combine volume and surface pattern. Anyway, and the bird here asleep, as birds do, or manage to do, sleeping with their while perched. Now here is a painting that we'll put beside it, a fan painting in the Palace Museum in Taipei. This was in the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition, and it was supposed to be by Lian Zhong. Well, this is obviously very much like the one in the big painting, except it's harder, and I'm not quite sure what to make of this. Maybe it's a copy, actually. It has rather impressive seals, and the Chinese Art Treasures text written by Ashwin Lippi takes it as a genuine work. But there's something uncomfortable about the way the different parts of the bird are set off as flat pattern, instead of the whole bird having the kind of volume and organic integrity that the best Academy bird paintings in the Huizong Academy have. So maybe this is a copy. At any rate, it associates the painting with Lian Zhong. Now, Lian Zhong, I've spoken of a little bit already in another connection. We saw, I'll put it on in a minute, a landscape by him earlier. Okay, Lian Zhong was a painter who active under Huizong, And later he moved to the south when the court moved to the south, and was active, in other words, in the early to middle 12th century. And down at the bottom of the painting here, we see a quail, partly hidden behind the roots in this the old tree and bamboo. Quail sort of running along. Now, this associates the painting, in my mind, with Lianzhong. He was the leading bird and flower master of Huizong's academy. And everything in the picture, including that matching of the shrike up above, suggests that Lianzhong may have been the artist. And I think I said this in my Skira book. I would put a bet on it that Lianzhong is the painter of this extraordinarily fine painting. Okay, here's a painting in Japan, a fan painting. This is attributed to Lianzhong, not signed, but lots of quail paintings are, and this is an early fine one. This could well be by him. I don't know. Fan painting, as I say, which in China there typically is, I'll talk about fan paintings in a bit, typically mounted in albums and kept flat, whereas in Japan, where they love to put things in their tokonoma and gaze at them in tea ceremonies and so on, it's mounted as a hanging scroll, and that affects it. That's why it has all the horizontal cracking, rather bad cracking. It wasn't meant to be rolled that way, in other words. Okay, but that's a side issue. Anyway, a quite lovely painting of a quail in its natural habitat. Here, put beside it, just to show you how a slightly lower level painting of quail, showing the spikiness of its plumage. This is from a quail painting in the hands of one of the dealers. Doesn't matter who. Attributed, of course, to Lianzhong. There are many paintings of quail in Japan. It's a favorite subject, and all kinds of symbolic things. Now, I'll bring back, just to remind you, next please, the next two. Lianzhong is also the painter of, as you see, this landscape in the Cleveland Museum in the style of Zhao Lingrong. I brought it in to show that the Academy painter, Zhao Lingrong, was the originator of this motif and this style. The cottages among leafy trees and mist going through it and the marshy ground and so on. And at the same time, while Zhao Lingrong is the more important artist in that sense, it's the Academy master who gets the parts of the picture representationally right, as you see in the detail. The old tree is painted with the academician's skill and ease, and the shoreline and the reeds growing beside it. In Zhao Lingrong's painting, as you remember, they're very stiff and amateurish. And the water, everything, and in other words, to find Academy work in the manner of an amateur artist. Okay, so much for that. I'm saying this major painting may be by Lianzhong. Now we'll go on talking a bit more about Huizong's Academy and the painters in it. Now, as an example of the kind of thing that he promoted, here's a painting that was in that Met exhibition called Possessing the Past, was it? I wrote about it in that. Peonies and Cat. It's a large hanging scroll, maybe not complete. The cat is looking up at something that isn't there. It may have been butterflies in the air or something. Peony bushes and a cat that is that has a leash attached to it. And anyway, but there's a story which some of you'll know if you've been done reading in Chinese painting, about a painting that in which it was praised by Huizong because the artist had got the time of day right. The peonies were wide, or in full bloom, as they are at midday, and on the other hand, the cat's eyes were slits, as though as the cat's eyes would be in the bright sun. Well, that in this sense, here's the next, please, the cat. Next detail. This painter seems to have got it wrong in that sense. Maybe it's a painting made to demonstrate the wrong one or whatever. The cat's eyes are more open, and so are the peonies, so that there seems to be a contradiction there. I don't know quite, but anyway, it's a fine painting that relates in some way at least to this story of about the cat and the peonies. Okay, next, on to the next, please. Now, let me read before we go on what a couple bits of writing on bird and flower painting. Here is what Shren Huapu, the court catalog of Huizong's collection, has to say about bird and flower painting. This is from the Bush and Shore book, page 128. Now, the camellia and the peony among flowers, and the phoenix and the peacock among birds, must be made to seem rich and aristocratic. The pine and bamboo, the plum and chrysanthemum, or the seagull and egret, swallow and wild duck, must be seen as reserved and quiet. As for the lofty dignity of the crane, the attack of the hawk, or the beauty of the spreading branches and leaves of the willow and wutong tree, the loneliness of the stately pine, and the generousness of the ancient cypress, revealed in painting, they possess the ability to exhilarate men's thoughts. For the most part, such works are able to capture creation and transmit quintessential spirit and let the imagination roam as if it were viewing these things on the spot. Viewing them on the spot, that's of course an old idea which we have talked about. I have talked about in earlier lectures as the primary concept of expression in painting. That is, the paintings express some ideas of nature, and they express these ideas, transmit them to the mind of the viewer, as if the things were actually seen before his eyes. That is to say, the image of the thing substitutes for the thing itself and evokes the same responses. Huizong, the Emperor Huizong, was affected by the new literati painting and its theories, which represent a break with that theory of expression. And in literati painting theory, expression comes rather from inside the artist rather than outside in the world outside. But Huizong also, as I say, insisted on realistic portrayal, and he insisted on a certain kind of refinement of execution. He didn't like rough drawing. At the end of the previous lecture, I showed a painting by an artist done under Huizong and inscribed by him, and I read about how the treatment of this artist in the catalog describes his work as refined and delicate, not careless, disciplined, not loose. So Huizong, on the one hand, took up this idea of poetic imagery, poetic content in painting from the literati, but he also also insisted on realistic portrayal. Now, I want to read also what Huizong, the criteria that he established in his Academy for Painters. And this is from the essay by Weigam Ho, Ho-Wei-Jian, in the Eight Dynasties Catalog. Okay, here we go. The highest grade, the animated appearance and the emotional state of the subject is perfectly represented with simple brushwork and fully developed ideas, without imitating any ancient masters. At the same time, forms and colors are rendered naturally and endowed with lofty concepts and archaic flavors. Middle grade, the seeming imitation of old masters is amplified and transcended by a heightened sense of antiquity. Forms and colors of the subject are simulated with fidelity and propriety, with elegant colors and a cleverly conceived design. Lower grade, the ability to make imitations or copies that are close approximations to the true character of the original. Okay, that's what what Huizong's catalog writes as translated by Ho-Wei-Jian, Weigam Ho. Okay, Huizong then would set themes for painting, and he would award prizes to the painters who most subtly caught his poetic ideas. There were famous cases. One, he set the theme of a wine shop and a bamboo grove, and the painter who won didn't paint the wine shop at all, but only indicated it by a flag protruding above the bamboo, flag indicating it's a wine shop there. We can't see that painting, of course. It exists for us only as a literary reference. So I put on to stand in for it an anonymous fan painting in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, with buildings not exactly hidden, but subtly set among trees and bushes. Or a painting of horses returning from trampling on flowering fields. And the winning painter showed the horses with butterflies fluttering around their hoofs, butterflies attracted by the fragrance of the flowers they had trampled. Okay, whether these paintings ever existed or were simply dreamed up, we don't know. But at any rate, poetic ideas were valued, what we used to call conceits, in the old sense of conceit, related to the word concept. Now we'll see a lot of that going through painting the Southern Sung. Now let's go on then and look at some more bird and flower painting by artists of the Academy. This now on the screen, the whole and detail, is a fan painting. I'll talk about fan painting later. That's a very important subject indeed. But for the time being, let's just say fan painting. Fan painting signed by an artist of the late 12th century Academy, Zhang Mao. Not an important artist, and this is the only work I know of his, but I put it on just to represent a certain, well, how to put it? I wrote about this one in my Bird and Flower lecture. We are approaching here that end point of preciousness in which painting of the late Sung Academy virtually refines itself out of existence. Well, there is that tendency in the painting, but fortunately, we have a lot of paintings of a more robust and traditional kind that were still being done by the Academy artists, and I'll go on talking about them. Okay, the next, please. Yes, here is a big painting, a big hanging scroll, maybe a screen originally. It has that suggestion. When you see something big and square like this, instead of tall and narrow, you think maybe a screen. This is by the painter Li Di. I think I talked about him in the previous lecture and I was talking about painters of the Academy. At any rate, I won't give information on them now. This is the only signed work of this size, apart from the Cui Bo, that we have from bird and flower painters of the Academy. And it represents a hawk in the upper left about to swoop onto a pheasant in the lower right. And the pheasant is fleeing and trying to get on the bushes or under a rock or something before it's caught. Okay, and here details. Here's a detail of the hawk up in the tree, all done in this very fine Academy style. And here down below, the pheasant. The old tree done with very convincing bark, and the rock pitted in an elegant way. This is all very much an Academy painting, but on a grander scale. Well, what this painting might have been for, we don't know. Conceivably, one can guess that a painting of this kind might have been given to a military man because it shows the kind of fierceness of the hawk in a positive way. Okay, here's the detail of the old tree and rock. As I say, everything painted in a skilled, precise Academy way. The leaves of the tree, whatever. Here's the hawk up close, and here is the pheasant, its mouth open, running as fast as it can to get away from the hawk. Okay, enough for that one. There must have been lots of such paintings done, but they don't survive all that much because they're too big, or they survive only in fragments. The question of what such paintings meant in their time, how they were used, is interestingly dealt with in a new and important book titled Decoded Messages, The Symbolic Language of Chinese Animal Paintings, by Huizong, who's now a curator at the Cincinnati Art Museum. This book is also a catalog of an exhibition she organized there. Huizong has been working for quite a few years, ever since I began reading her writings, on identifying and clarifying the subject matter of Chinese paintings through reading associated texts. This is an important and, in fact, a necessary part of our study, which I'm largely ignoring in these lectures, so that her book usefully supplements whatever I can say about the visual qualities of these paintings in these lectures. I'll add this book to the readings at the end of our handout for this lecture. She translates inscriptions and references, indicating, for instance, that paintings of hawks striking at other birds served in the Yuan dynasty to criticize powerful and ruthless men, as protest, that is, by the oppressed literati against their military rulers, whereas in the Ming, by contrast, they tend to have a more positive meaning, according to her, serving to glorify the military men for whom they were done, to whom they were presented. I'll use her last section on paintings of fish, especially heavily when I turn to those in a later lecture. Change, please. Now, another large painting, which at first appeared to be a similar subject by an unknown Southern Sung master, unsigned so far as I can remember, is in the Shanghai Museum. I made slides from it, but I have no idea whether or where it is published. In this, again, two birds, one above and one below, except that, and indeed both birds are seen in flight with wings spread, one near the top swooping down above branches of pine trees and in front of an immense overhanging cliff, the other, down below, flying as if trying to escape. Both of them are some kind of jay, I think. I don't know for sure. Well, at least I had read it as one bird sort of swooping down on another, but my collaborator, Rand Chatterjee, pointed out that in this case, they were not a hawk and its prey, but they appear to be birds of the same kind. So, is it the male pursuing the female? I'll have to leave that question open. The pine branches and the cliff set off a shallow foreground space within which the action, however we are going to read it, is taking place. So next, please. Locating the jay here below the ominously overhanging rocky mass increases what I took to be the sense of peril. The blossoming tree below provides a seasonal indicator, perhaps reinforces the more positive reading of the scene as a pursuit preceding a sexual encounter, a mating. Well, I've interpreted it freely, but Chinese artists were careful to make the settings of these scenes serve some expressive purpose, however we read them. Next, please. Here's a detail of the bird below in flight, flying with its open beak as if squawking. The blossoms of the tree below are in full flower, with the petals about to fall. They may be trembling in the wake of the bird's flight. The painter successfully transmits, that is, a sense of the momentary, the transitory, with heavy implications for all the pictured participants, whatever, as I say, the scene may be, and I'm not quite clear. Here, finally, is a detail in which my face mysteriously appears. In the old days, when I had to photograph paintings in museum cases using a flash gun, the light would sometimes bounce off the glass of the case and make a glare, or even, as here, reflect the image of my face, mouth open and eyes squinted as I concentrated on making the detail. You multiply this by 1,000 times and you have a big part of the origins of this series, which depend very heavily on just that kind of operation, carried out over decades. Next. Now then, also by Li Di are several album leaves, including here one. This is a slide made without the signature, I'm afraid, but there is a signature on it. Two chicks, dated 1197. That is, the signature includes a cyclical date corresponding to 1197 in the Western calendar. I always say dated 1197 for quickness. The birds here are portrayed in the best Academy manner, as we saw in the previous lecture. Washes of color plus fine strokes for the surface, and full of life and real body and so on. Lovely little creatures. Here's the upper part of one of them with its mouth open, chirping, and you can see the drawing of the really quite sensitive and skillful drawing of the plumage of this recently hatched bird. And here is a detail of the other one, close up, again showing the drawing of the feathers and the soft plumage, which the artist catches very well. They're able somehow to get something of the inner life of these creatures. Here is another album leaf by Li Di, also in the Palace Museum in Beijing, representing a hound. It's signed and dated to 1197. I should say there's another version of the same image in an album leaf in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Paintings of this kind often survive in more than one version, and it's not always clear which is by the artist. Maybe both are. Anyway, Li Di has penetratingly portrayed this hound, its head lowered, its bones showing. It wears a collar, so it isn't a stray, but it isn't the pampered kind of lapdog either. It's a real cur, looking guilty as hounds can do. One could credit the artist even with catching class distinctions in the canine world. Okay, now to go on to a few others. Here's an album leaf by a painter of the Southern Sung Academy named Lin Chun. Lin Chun was another bird and flower specialist, active in the late 12th century academy. And this is a signed album leaf by him, the signature down here in the lower left, showing a small bird on the branch of a peach tree. All very decorative and lovely. Here's a close-up. The leaves showing their age, partly worm-eaten or pitted, and partly turning brown, and turning at different angles to the painting surface. The peaches are pink, not all that, a little bit over-decorative maybe. Anyway, here's the bird close-up. These little perched on the twig and facing upward and perky and full-bodied and charming. Anyway, lovely little painting. And here is a maybe more interesting painting, a fan painting in this case. I will, as I say, later talk at length about fan paintings, but this is a close-up scene of grapes and insects. This is in the Palace Museum in Beijing. The signature, Lin Chun, is over here in the middle left. And here are the details. Here are the grapes. The grapes are not painted with too much roundness, but enough to give them some volume, not to stand out from the surface, so to speak. It's the surface design is very important. So we have to imagine paintings like this carried by people and actually enjoyed by them as they fanned themselves in hot weather or whatever, or just carried to show them off to their friends, enjoyed as paintings you actually have with you. Okay, here is the grasshopper in the lower left. We saw a painting attributed to Zhao Chang in the previous lecture with grasshopper and insects in it. This is rather more sensitive. That was a little bit harder, I think. Anyway, this is, but of course it's a fan painting and it's meant to be seen close up, and so the drawing would be more sensitive and soft. The jagged drawing of a leaf to the right is quite fine. And here are the dragonfly, beautiful painting of a dragonfly with the wings, the translucent wings, and so on. Quite a lot of lovely painting. All right, next then, here are a pair of paintings, two fan paintings, both of them attributed to Zhao Chang. Zhao Chang was an early Sung painter, but these are actually late Sung Academy paintings. They're not by Zhao Chang at all. It was just a name. We don't have any genuine works by Zhao Chang. He was his is one of the names commonly used for attributions in Japan. Doesn't mean much of anything. We saw a handscroll attributed to him last time. I showed it in connection with Shuxi because someone had said it's in the style of Shuxi. I didn't agree with that. But at any rate, Zhao Chang was an early Sung artist. He was the artist about whose works Mi Fu wrote rather scornfully that they're good only for decorating the walls when you are marrying off your daughter. We don't have any reliable work by him surviving, as I say. At any rate, here are two late Sung, quite beautiful fan paintings of the kinds that are preserved particularly well in Japan. Isolated branches, no setting, seen for themselves completely. I don't have details, unfortunately. I didn't photograph these directly. Well, the symbolism of flowers is a complicated study in itself, worth doing certainly, but not really needed for the appreciation of paintings like this. These are just superlative renderings of flowering branches. In both cases, with the main branch going diagonally, and that's typical of Southern Sung paintings, as we've seen in many, many cases, and with the rather heavier parts of the branch and flowers and leaves in one segment and the other more open. The leaves curling in space very convincingly, dark and light for the upper and lower surfaces of the leaves, bunches of blossoms drawn with some projecting forward and some back. Okay, we'll see other paintings more, closer up when I have details and talk more about that. Or we did already in some of the paintings by Li Di in the previous lecture. Well, we should remember that painting of this kind was generally in bad repute among critics of later times and was being included in the general disparagement of Southern Sung Academy painting by critics as over-refined or appealing too much to the senses. Alexander Soper, whom I introduced in the first lecture, is one of our major art historians of the Chinese art historians, Japanese also, of the generation before mine. Alexander Soper pointed out in his article titled Standards of Quality in Northern Sung Painting, which is in the Archives of Chinese Art number 11 for 1957, pointed out that the somewhat moralistic arguments of the scholar critics of this period and later against rich color and decorative styles put the painters in the paradoxical position of being constrained from capturing in their paintings the very qualities that constitute the real nature of flowers, as they are normally perceived: subtleties of color, graceful rhythms of contour in the leaves and petals, close differentiation of species by careful observation and depiction of distinguishing details, even as the painters were being enjoined otherwise to pursue the inner essence of their subjects instead of the outer appearance. And this anomaly of critical theory certainly affected the development of BirdandFlower painting in the later centuries. It was never to regain the heights that it achieved in the Sung. It continues to be done in great quantities, to be sure, and there are all kinds of BirdandFlower paintings from Yuan, Ming, and Qing, but not of this kind of refinement, really. Okay, here's another. This is, well, it's a lotus blossom. I don't think it's attributed, or if it is, I don't remember who it's attributed to. It's in the Palace Museum in Beijing, and here is a detail of it, taking us down into the heart of it. And, well, what then? I have nothing to say about it. It's just very beautiful. Very lovely, that is. Not particularly subtle or refined, just a lovely painting of a lotus blossom. All right, enough of that. Now, going on. Here's a pair of paintings. These are taken from reproductions. A pair of paintings by Ma Yuan. He's a major master of the Southern Sung Academy, whom we'll treat at length in Lecture 11. He's the first artist of three to be treated in that lecture. Ma Yuan, paintings of apricot blossoms and peach blossoms. A pair of album leaves in the Palace Museum in Beijing, in Taiwan. One of them is signed by Ma Yuan. The one on the left is signed in the lower left corner, as you see there. And the couplets, poetic couplets inscribed on them, which were written there, and then Ma Yuan was set to do a picture to answer to the couplets. The poetic couplets are written by Yang Meizi, dates are 1162 to 1232, who was the Emperor Ningzong's consort, a very important person in Southern Sung art. Li Huishu has studied her very well and written about her. Anyway, before going on, I want to add a note about a newly published book by Li Huishu, who, as I've said before, teaches at UCLA, and she specializes in Southern Sung court art, especially the engagement of women in it, both painting and calligraphy. I saw the book recently in a Berkeley bookstore and immediately bought it. It's titled Empresses, Art, and Agency in Sung China, published this year, 2010, by the University of Washington Press. She discusses at greater length than I do many of the same paintings that we're looking at, and she deals with the inscriptions accompanying them in far greater depth than I can. This includes these Ma Yuan leaves on the screen now, and also a Ma Lin painting of plum blossoms that we're about to see. Anyway, I recommend her book very highly. Okay, the couplets read, one of them, meeting the wind, they offer their artful charm. Wet by the dew, they boast their pink beauty. On the one and on the other, over 1,000 years they transmit their seeds. Each spring they begin anew to spread their blossoms. So the couplets they're kind of, how to put it, duality, two parts of the couplet, two leaves, calligraphy and painting, which make for a certain kind of wonderful symmetry with contrasts that is part of the whole highly formal production of these things. Okay, I'll come back to talk more about Ma Yuan as a painter of bird and flower, well, especially bird paintings, landscapes of the birds. So let me talk about Ma Yuan. Before going on, I'll show a good detail of the leaf on the right, which reveals, I think, the extreme refinement of this painting. You realize this is a section of an album leaf, and it's only 4 or 5 inches across. And as you see, the familiar chemical deterioration, rokusho yake in Japanese, has damaged the leaves and the twigs in the painting. But let's admire the super sensitive depiction of the different stages of flowering, from tight bud to full bloom, with the petals about to fall. Or the touches of pink on the buds, the twists and bumps of the twigs, and all the other visual properties of this small living thing, all revealing processes of natural growth, all captured with deep understanding by an artist who could pretty much do the same for any other natural or human or landscape subject he was presented with, and to do it all unpretentiously as part of his job as a court painter, supplying multiple images to go with imperial poems, as his imperial patrons composed them and wrote them. And let me say again that if you can look at paintings like this and go on putting down Southern Swing Academy painting as academic and overly realistic, inferior to the brush waving and the ink splashing of the amateur masters, you belong to a different world of connoisseurship and art appreciation than the ones that I myself inhabit. Okay, next, change. As I was about to record this and post it, I found on the web a color photo someone had made of a twig from a flowering tree outside her window, and I copied it and put it on here to show how, although the two differ in lots of ways, how much of true natural form and life, down to tiny details, Ma Yuan is able to capture in his image. What is there in Western art that is really comparable? Scientific drawings we have, and Audubon prints, and endless decorative flower painting, and even some great flower paintings by Dutch masters and others. But you put them all together and you look hard and you don't find, I think, anything really comparable to this. A sense that the artist, in order to do such a picture, must have studied the thing in nature long and hard, and depicted it with transcendent skill and sensitivity. I want the achievement of these Southern Swing Academy artists who could do such pictures in large numbers all the time as part of their jobs to be at last recognized. Okay, that's all that one. And here now is a very famous painting, and very properly famous, by Ma Lin, Ma Yuan's son. Again, somebody will treat at length in lecture number 11. Branches of Blossoming Plum in the Beijing Palace Museum. This has a title here, which is something like Icy Tips, as I remember. Okay, and again, a piece of calligraphy written in the upper part, again by young Meidze. This has a date in a seal, a date 1216, early 13th century. This is a quite famous painting. It was in the Palace Museum in Beijing, but it stayed in the mainland instead of going to Taiwan with most of the other hanging scroll pictures from the Palace Museum. It was involved in a court case. It was pulled out. It never got back and somehow stayed in the mainland. Anyway, okay. And now let's see the details here. Here you can read the title on the left there, and very beautifully painted branches of blossoming plum spread out on the surface. A very sparse composition, very beautiful. And over here, next detail, on the left, here is Ma Lin's signature. Your servant Ma Lin, painted, written, that is, very modestly and very small. And beautifully painted blossoms and branches. Okay, Here's another detail. Oh yes, a little bit of that decomposition of the silk from heavy green, but not too much. On the whole, a pretty well preserved painting, and beautifully drawn blossoms. Here next. Okay, here is another Ma Lin painting. This one in the Palace Museum in Taipei. I don't know where it was published, but anyway, I put it on just to make one simple point. As you see, it's a twig of blossoming plum and a twig of bamboo overhanging a stream, or a lake or whatever, water. And down below there's a rock, but also a rather simply drawn reflection of the bamboo and the blossoms. Well, that's unusual in Chinese painting. This is unusual as the shadows that we see in the beginning of the Xiaozhengchang scroll of the Red Cliff. And again, why is it done by the artist? The answer is simple. Because it must have been there in the couplet or the quatrain or whatever that Ma Lin was set to illustrating. The artist of this kind of artist didn't suddenly decide, I think I'll paint a reflection. Won't that be exciting? He had to respond to what the imperial calligrapher and poet, the emperor and the emperor's consorts and others would devise couplets or quatrains, often in the Tang manner. And I discuss all this at some length in my book called the Lyric Journey about poetic painting. So at any rate, it's a response to a couplet or quatrain or something that we don't have and can only imagine. But it's a very rare and unusual case of a depiction of a reflection in the water. I find that I do, after all, have two details of this leaf, which I can show. First, one from the upper right, showing the bamboo leaves overlapping the flowering twigs, all very sensitively rendered. One can see the thicker central veins of the leaves, the browning at their ends, and the small leaves growing from their stalks, as well as the knots and twists of the twigs of the blossoming plum. Where an ordinary artist would have depicted these in simple and conventional ways, the high-level academy master makes out of even such small details little exercises in close observation and exact depiction. Next. And down below, the reflection in the water beside the rock. Now we can see that the reflection included a single blossom, along with the branch and the ends of 3 bamboo leaves, but that some kind of chemical erosion has all but obliterated the blossom. The damage to the right of this indicates that the leaf was folded up the middle, as such horizontal leaves often were when they were mounted in albums, and then was damaged along the bottom of the fold. One more I'll put on just to sort of give you a sense of a hint of what's going to happen later with the artist Liang Kai, another great master. We'll treat him again at the end of one lecture, the end of lecture 11 as I remember, although he leaves the academy and eventually becomes a Chan or Zen painter. At least that is the story that is generally believed. And Chan painting or Zen painting will make up the last long lecture in this series. At any rate, this is a painting in the Palace Museum in Beijing, signed work of Liang Kai, showing a willow tree and 2 birds in flight. Quite lovely, evocative, simple, and so on. Okay, so much for Academy. Now, what would have pleased the literati critics? The literati critics, as I say, were, disparaging, really, downplaying and being contemptuous of this kind of painting, saying it was too decorative, too beautiful, too skillful, too everything they didn't like. Okay, so what would have pleased them? Well, we have a few works that represent their taste and their principles, and one of these is a handscroll representing the 100 flowers, a handscroll in ink on paper only in the Palace Museum of Beijing. Well, it's anonymous, late Song probably, conceivably into the Yuan dynasty, but let's say late Song. We don't know who painted it. There's an artist active in that period, late Song into early Yuan, named Zhao Mengjian, who painted scrolls of narcissus and painted flowers that are somewhat like this. If you look at Wen Fong's book, Beyond Representation, pages 304 to 306, you'll find his discussion of an example in the Metropolitan Museum. Well, this picture, as I say, anonymous, was, in contrast to the things we've been looking at, was the kind of thing that the literati scholar officials really appreciated, because it's done in ink only, and it's quite austere, and it has all the good qualities. And this one was published completely by the Palace Museum in 46. Really excellent plates, and was much praised. Well, okay, let's look at the details of it. It's just quite fine in its way. The slides, by the way, suggest that there may have been, as if there was some light color, light brownish color, but I think that's only a matter of the photography. It's purely ink on paper. Anyway, here are two birds perched on a flowering branch, and here, well, another and a flowering picture brought up very close to the picture plane, and well, let's just go on. Here, a bird, a little bird perched and singing, seen in strict profile, as it might be in Huizong's picture. There's a lot that is archaistic, old-fashioned, alluding to earlier kinds of painting, and then flowers spread out, and here close-up branches and flowers, but very clear, nothing really tangled or nothing of what you might call real naturalism, and very neat and fine brushwork, fine brush line, smooth ink washes, and so on. Next, please. And here, more blossoming branches. I have a lot of details of this. I'm not going to show a lot of them, and I really don't have much to say about it, except that it fits this more cool, reserved taste of the literati for something that is, as I say, somewhat austere, and that doesn't have all the decorative beauty. Here's another detail with a flower and leaves all spread out very neatly on the surface. And here another flower, it's a lily. Okay, what to say? Nothing much. And here last, a flower of black, a hibiscus maybe, who knows. Anyway, and this is a painting which, I say, has been much praised and is exactly what the literati critics wanted. On the other hand, if we can be independent of that kind of writing, we might very well prefer the other. Here I'll put beside it at the end a painting that we saw before in the previous lecture, one of two album leaves in the Tokyo National Museum by Li Di, Academy artist, of pink and white hibiscus. Well, I guess I don't need to make the obvious points. I don't need to express my own personal preference for the Academy paintings and for all that they represent and all that was pretty much ended with the end of Sung, and very much opposed, as I say, and scoffed at by the literati critics. Before leaving the flower painting of the late Sung, I want to call your attention to a large body of very fine paintings of flowers and insects, especially, done by artists of what is called the Piling school. Piling is the old name for modern Wujin, located midway between Suzhou and Nanjing in Jiangsu province. Shujiro Shimada, my great teacher, wrote an article on the Piling school, but I can't find the reference. I might insert it later into the course materials. Of course, it's in Japanese, and those of you really serious note that his writings were collected in his late years into, I remember, 2 large blue volumes, and they will be in most libraries. Anyway, you can find it. Piling school artists specialized in technically very fine, realistic paintings of flowers and insects, butterflies, and so on. Typically, they're unsigned, and they're found now almost only in Japan. There must be a few old pieces in China they saved because they got wrong signatures of famous masters or attributed to famous masters, etc. Anyway, but mostly in Japan. These are 2 examples in the Kyoto National Museum, maybe late Sung or early Yuan in date. I should add there are a great many fine flower and bird and insect paintings in Japan. many of them with added signatures and seals and attributions to famous artists, but really just popular paintings by minor specialist masters working in the Jiangsu and Zhejiang region of China, producing unpretentious but lovely paintings that were imported to Japan, but were too attractive, too pleasing to the eye to have been judged worth preserving in China. So again, we have them mostly in Japan. I could show a great many examples. These will have to stand in for them. An interesting and typical example is this anonymous Sung painting of shells gathered in a piece of green cloth, as though one had gathered them from the beach and is bringing them home. It has an old, meaningless attribution to Zhao Chong, the early Sung master. The painting was owned by the late dealer Yabumoto Sogoro. A great many small, interesting paintings of minor subjects were produced in quantities and enjoyed by people of their time, but were too trivial in subject and style to be preserved in China. But they were brought back to Japan by travelers to China or introduced by Chinese traders, and they've been there ever since. Little noticed, but we can still find them if we look. Some of them have Chan Buddhist associations, and I'll treat those in the last lecture under the general heading of Sogenga, which I take to mean Chan-related paintings preserved in Japan. Finally, I want to show a group of Southern Sung BirdandFlower album leaves, pictures that float free, so to speak, in not being safely attributed to any particular artist, but which deserve attention for their quality. I could add a great many more if I took the time to assemble them. Someone else can do that in the future. We need a serious study of Southern Sung Academy-style paintings of this kind. Next. Seals with the names of famous Sung artists were often added to these leaves. The additions are clearly identifiable because they take forms such as this bronze vessel with the name of Xu Shi on it that were never used in the early period. Xu Shi, remember, is a great master of the early Sung, from whom we have just about nothing, if anything. This practice of adding this kind of signature in the form of a seal is more common in Japan than in China, but this leaf is in the Palace Museum in Beijing. I'm not quite sure why that is. In this, a finely painted dragonfly lights on a flowering twig. The shape is that of a different kind of fan, presumably used along with the more familiar rounded form. For some reason, old paintings of this shape were also found more commonly in Japan, seldom in China. Perhaps this is an old painting preserved for centuries in Japan and then brought back to China at more recent times, which somehow found its way into the Palace Museum there. Here is a fan-shaped leaf in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, reproduced as number 47 in Wen Feng's book, Beyond Representation. We've already seen, and we'll see again in a lecture about him, the leaf by Ma Lin, with a reflection in the water of bamboo and a blossoming branch. These same subjects are treated similarly here, the bamboo showing its age with the leaves browned at their ends, some of the blossoms in full bloom, others still in bud. And we saw paintings of sparrows in the previous lecture, 10a. Here again, they are perched in different ways on the twigs, with one further back in the upper left painted slightly dimmer, the old device of separating planes of depth by differing ink tonality. A lively, interesting scene that reads as part of a larger world. Next. In this anonymous leaf in the Palace Museum in Beijing, 5 sparrows have gathered on a thin branch of a tree with berries of some kind. The season is autumn, as the red and brown leaves reveal. A botanist could no doubt deliver a lecture on such a leaf, telling what the tree is and what all the fine details in the artist's rendering of it reveal. And an ornithologist could similarly deliver one on the birds, on the gregarious habits of sparrows and how they move and how they perch. I myself can do neither. I can only marvel at how Southern Sung Academy masters and others working outside the Academy in their styles could produce so many engaging and high-level paintings of this kind. Next. Here in another anonymous leaf in the Palace Museum in Beijing, a large yellow bird on a twig of a pomegranate tree has pulled a worm out of one of the open pomegranates and is eating it. The condition of the fruit and the browning leaves of the tree, which again curl convincingly in space, are seasonal indicators, and again they're realistically, almost photographically rendered. Now, next please. 2 more leaves in the Palace Museum, Beijing, in images taken from reproductions in their large volume titled Songran Huazi, or Album Leaves by Sung Artists. At the left, still another bird on a twig, this time the twig of a peepah bush or tree, with the whole complex again rendered in a strikingly three-dimensional way, especially the central cluster of leaves and the fruit. We're so used to looking at color photographs that such an image may seem somehow familiar, since it seems almost photographic. But imagine it as seen by people living in a pre-photography age who could only somehow connect it with their own visual memories. The other painting, a fan-shaped leaf depicting a branch of baicha or white tea. If I were in my old study surrounded by dictionaries, I could look that up and tell you what kind of a plant this is, but I'm not and I can't. The next, please. Here's a leaf attributed to Ma Lin in the Goto Museum in Tokyo. It's unsigned. The attribution is plausible since the branch and the flowers are definitely in the Ma family style, but they also had many copyists and imitators outside the Academy. We read in records of the time that a painting done in the Academy would appear in copies for sale in the Hangzhou market outside before the day was over. So a great many copies of Academy paintings exist, and probably more than the originals, and this may well be one of them. The painting of the branch seems rather hard and heavy for the master's hand. 2 birds are seen, perhaps the male and female of the same species, but more likely birds of different kinds, with one is orange tan in color and seen up above and behind the branch, dimmer in tone, the other prominent seen below. Next. Here's a fan-shaped leaf in a Kyoto private collection attributed to a minor artist named Wang Li Ban, unknown in China and mentioned only in Japanese records. In fact, it's an anonymous picture belonging to the genre of xiaojing, or small scene, an evocative kind of subject favored by Southern Sung Academy masters. We've seen a number of them already, and we'll see more examples by Ma Yuan in the lecture on him. In this one, 2 water birds, a little hard to see in the lower right, looking like ducks, are sheltering in a tangle of bamboo and an old plum tree that's beginning to bloom, even in this wintry setting. The darkened sky enhances the mood. Some kind of path or road appears to zigzag down in the left distance. Altogether, a deeply absorbing, convincingly atmospheric scene. Next, please. 2 more leaves from the Songran Huazi volume of Album Leaves in the Palace Museum in Beijing, both anonymous. At the left, a painting of what appears to be fine willow tendrils hanging from the tree and blowing in the wind. The couplet in the upper left is in the hand of Yang Meizi, so the painting could well be by Ma Lin. It exhibits his kind of refinement, and they seem to have often worked together. The tendrils appear to be putting forth some kind of blossoms, bearing the seeds of the tree that will be dispersed in the wind. The fan-shaped leaf, also loosely in the manner of Ma Lin, and probably dating from around his time, near the end of Song, portrays the Chinese orchid, Lanhua. This was to become a favorite subject for the scholar amateur artists, who depict it with broad brushstrokes in ink, never in color, never in line and color, with this kind of naturalism. They profess to disdain this more realistic manner of painting in color, largely, I think, because it was quite beyond their technical capacity, and they persuaded their audiences that their kind of painting was better. This kind was to be rejected as low class, alas for Chinese painting. Next, a final leaf from the Songran Huazi volume, signed by the late 12th century Academy master Li Song, and perhaps by him, although the line drawing seems rather flat and the whole more heavy-handed than his reliable works are. So it's more likely a copy. As I say, copies of works by Academy masters greatly outnumber probably the genuine works, or else an anonymous work, maybe later than Song, with an interpolated signature. Anyway, the appeal of such a painting is decorative and appeals to lovers of flowers. And these were done, as I say, in crop, no doubt, in huge numbers, and mostly preserved in Japan. Although this one seems again to be in Beijing Palace Museum. The next, please. The lesser work seen here, a much damaged painting of a butterfly and a blossoming plant, geranium, I think, which I put on as an example of what one can still find on the market in Japan. I used to own it myself. I bought it cheap from a small dealer in Tokyo who had intended to have it repaired, but hadn't gotten around to it. These slides show it before remounting, which I had done by my favorite mounter, Meguro, who charged me much more than the painting itself would cost. It's been reproduced several times elsewhere in its remounted state. I show it like this as an example of how one can buy paintings in bad condition and make them look like new in the hands of an expert mounter. And next, please. Now here is what it looks like after mounting, an image taken from a color reproduction. I don't have a good one made from the painting itself, and like most of my old collection, it's now whereabouts unknown. Collection was dispersed, in other words. Many of the leaves I've shown earlier very probably went through such a remounting as this, although the Chinese practice of mounting them in albums preserved them better than the Japanese, who often preferred to make them into hanging scrolls, so they were rolled vertically, and they suffered the kind of horizontal cracking that this one displays in its pre-mounting state. Those horizontal cracks indicate that it was mounted as the Japanese do and rolled, as I say, as a hanging scroll. The silk wasn't really made to be rolled that way, and it cracks rather badly. We've seen this commonly in album leaves, sometimes the vertical cracks, which mean it was originally part of a hand scroll. Okay, next. Finally, a fan-shaped leaf from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, a robin perches on the flowering twig, posing in strict profile, as a bird might be shown in a painting by some Huizong Academy master. The twigs and the flowers are more closely characterized, with blossoms fully open, past their prime, with petals about to fall. The leaves turn brown and pitted on their upper surfaces. Next. The bird, on the other hand, is rendered flat, without much sense of rounded body, almost as if it had been done by the imperial hand. Perhaps the painting was indeed a collaboration between some less competent or court amateur artist who painted the robin and engaged a proper academy master to paint in the rest, the plant setting, as Huizong had done, or at least so I believe he did. Next. A closer in detail shows this quality of the plant form strikingly. Like others we've seen, represented as if observed from only a short distance away. I would question whether any other artists in the whole history of world art in depicting subjects of this kind have matched the technical precision and the visual truthfulness that the best Southern Sung Academy masters are capable of. That this quality is just what we are endlessly told we should not admire in Chinese painting makes it all the more important that those of us who are not bound and committed to that orthodox literati way of looking are fully aware of these achievements and celebrate them as they deserve to be celebrated. All right, that's all for those. We'll continue with Southern Sung Academy painting in the next lecture, lecture 11, seeing works that are associated with four great masters, one of whom, the last of them, Liang Kai, as I say, left the academy and became, so it's believed at least, a Chan or Zen painter. And Chan painting will be the subject of our last long lecture, which will end this series. Okay, now all for this lecture.